Melanie Gibbs' husband, David Warwick, took the stand in the Lori Daybell trial. Now, while he was on the stand, he shed more light onto Chad and Lori's beliefs. He also talked about what happened that weekend that he visited and saw JJ for what would be the last time people would see him. He also left me with a lot of questions that we're going to talk about in today's video. My name's Paul, and welcome to the sofa. David Warwick is Melanie Gibbs' husband. Now, just for some context, he and Melanie were visiting Lori. This was one of the weekends, or last weekends, I should say, that people outside of them saw JJ alive, right? So he talks about that. He talks about several things while he's on the stand. And under cross-examination by Archibald, I think some very interesting things came out. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to listen to some audio clips from the testimony. I'm going to make commentary on them, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say down in the comment section below. So let's go ahead and get started.
Now, you were given information from the prosecution staff about that the court has said you cannot view you cannot listen to trial testimony, right?
Right.
And you were given instructions that you can't discuss people's trial testimony with them.
Right.
All right. Did there come a situation where you listened to someone's trial testimony?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, please?
Yes. I came down with an illness about 2 weeks ago, and Melanie didn't want to be alone up here when she came to court, and I couldn't make it that day, so I was going to drive a couple days later, but she ended up coming sooner. Anyway, so we stopped talking as she got here for one, and two, she was a little upset with me for not coming, and so I listened to 45 minutes of hers, but I was doing it to see how she was doing. And then 45 minutes into it, I remembered and I shut it off.
Okay.
So I was just concerned for her and just seeing how she was doing. And I didn't have my presence of mind because I was playing Aquaman, frankly. I was breathing water and it's just lost my presence of mind.
Alrighty, so on this right here, this is my question that I'm going to just go ahead and pose for everybody right down in the comment section. Do we think he did not want to take the stand and this was possibly a way to get out of it? Because this just seemed kind of odd to me. It seemed like a major thing that somebody would not just lose their presence of mind and be like, oh wait, I'm not supposed to be listening to this. So I just thought that this was interesting, but I'm also trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and being like, okay, you know, even though this is like a very unique situation, you know, maybe he didn't think about it, because the excuses that he will give for this is he's checking on Melanie. We'll hear this in a second. And so I can buy into that a little bit, but there also just seems to be something else going on there that I'm not 100% sure about. So let me know what you think.
Now, had you previously talked about this situation with your wife?
No, we haven't talked anything about the case. She lives in Arizona. I live in Utah.
Okay.
We have a distant relationship right now due to family needs. And so I knew she needed some time, so I just left her alone.
Now, I also thought that this was interesting to hear that they were living in separate places. I do not know all the information of this, so if somebody who has followed this like word for word type thing knows intel into this dynamic, I would be interested to hear it down in the comment section below, because I do find it interesting that they're separated or living separately due to some family issue. And again, I don't know these people personally. I haven't followed the case to that degree to know like their personal lives and that type thing. So again, a lot of this is just my opinions and, you know, allegedly slapped all over this, right? But I do think it's interesting that they are living separately right now. I also think that it's, you know, a hard pill to swallow to think of, you know, I didn't talk to Melanie about this or that or whatever. Now, mind you, there's one hand over here where I'm like, okay, you didn't talk to her about that stuff, but yet you watched this YouTube channel, right? And I was like, thank God he didn't say me. I would have died. You know what I'm saying? You know, but on the other hand, it's like, oh, no, we didn't talk about the case or anything like that. I mean, can you imagine being involved in this case to this degree, like on that level, and not being able to talk to someone that you're that close with? I mean, that would be really difficult, right? So let's keep listening.
She took a week off to come, and she needed to go back. She couldn't take any more time.
So how do you know that she's not still here in Boise if you haven't talked to her?
Well, I got a text from her saying that she was done and she was going home. But we didn't talk. We didn't talk anything about the case.
Okay, now these are the little slip-ups that I'm talking about right here, where it's like, oh, we weren't talking, we didn't do this, and then, well, how did you know that she was, where she was going? Well, she sent me a text. Okay, so you did talk. You know what I'm saying? And again, it can be innocent. It can be, it is what it is. I get what he's saying on one hand, but on another hand, it just doesn't look good. Like, he should have probably thrown that out there, but maybe he's not thinking about it.
What happened at the house when you met Lori Vallow?
They were just sitting around the table, and Lori she was an amazing hostess. She was fixing food, and it was just they were like having a social.
All right. And then did you have an opportunity to meet her again at any point after that?
Yes.
Okay. Where was it you met her again?
At her apartment in Rexburg, Idaho.
Now, I just wanted to kind of include that clip there to just, introduce some characters that we've heard throughout this. Not this testimony, but the testimony in the trial, and if you've been following the case in general, these are like key players that are being named off here. And again, we're leading up to that infamous evening of the podcast and the next morning and JJ and all that. So that's all the clip is included for. Let's continue.
Melanie and Lori wanted to do a podcast with me, which was supposed to happen in Arizona, which it didn't happen. I was coming up to see Melanie. And I was coming up for the Book of Mormon conference. And I was also coming up because my son just moved to Pocatello, Idaho. Okay. So I just kind of took a long weekend, just kind of see everybody and just enjoy the weekend and do the podcast.
Okay. And so
like I said, they're talking about the podcast. It's all getting set up. He's coming up to do this. Now, one reason I also want to include this is because this is a lingering question that I was left with throughout this. And I want to go ahead and put it out there, because it's a lens to look at and listen to these clips through. One thing that he will talk about throughout this is that he does not believe the things that he's hearing from Chad and Lori and whatnot, this type of stuff. And this isn't true. I'm not just trying to single David out for this. We hear this from multiple people in this, right? Whether it's the Melanies or whoever. We didn't believe these beliefs. These are really out there beliefs, but they're following them. They're doing podcasts with them. And so that's where there's this kind of disconnect with me with this of, okay, you're going to do all this stuff, and now, mind you, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you don't know all this stuff quite yet, and then you get up there and it's like, whoa, what are we talking about kind of situation, right? But nonetheless, just keep that in mind as we listen to this, because I literally just came out of listening to his testimony with, well, if you didn't think A, B, and C, then why are you doing D, E, and F?
But Melanie called me and said, hey, don't waste money on a hotel. Lori's got an extra room here. Why don't you just come and stay here? Okay. And the majority of the weekend is going to be in Rexburg anyway, so I decided to stay there.
Okay. So when you got to Lori's place in Rexburg, Idaho, who was at the house, if you remember?
When I got there, Alex Cox, Melanie, Lori, and JJ.
Now, had you met JJ Vallow before that time?
No.
Okay. Do you remember what JJ was doing when you got there?
He was sitting on the couch playing with toys.
Okay. And did you interact with him at all?
Yeah, I got a Down syndrome boy, autistic, so I just sat down with him to include him. I wanted to see how he was doing and talk to him, but it was like I wasn't even there. He never acknowledged me.
Okay. Now, when you got there, did you see Tylee Ryan there at all?
No.
Did you ever see Tylee Ryan that weekend?
No, I never did. Never did see her. I never did meet her.
Okay. Were you told where she was?
I was told that she was attending Rexburg, Idaho College, and she wanted to be independent.
Now, listening to this clip and him describing, seeing JJ and not seeing Tylee and that type thing, first of all, I just find it heartbreaking because you can start to envision and get these little images in my, at least for me in my head of, what that must have been like of, oh, well, there's JJ playing over there and that kind of thing, these haunting images. Now, also the whole dynamic where he's like, well, I didn't see Tylee and she said that, she was off at college and trying to be independent. And of course, hindsight, now we know really what was going on. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. Now, also, again, you hear these key player names being brought up and whatnot. So let's go ahead and listen to the next clip.
And so after you have that interaction with JJ, did you have any other interactions with JJ that weekend?
Yeah, there was he had a cardboard box and he was cutting doors and windows out of it, making a home out of it. So I got next to him again and just tried talking to him, but it was the same experience. He was very focused on that and didn't acknowledge me at all.
Okay. And did you ever see him engage with anyone?
I think he engaged with Alex once, and I can't remember what they were talking about, but it looked like a good relationship. Then he got to go outside and play with some children. Okay. And when he went outside, he just looked really happy.
Again, listening to these moments that he's describing of the interactions with JJ, I can't help but think of, Larry and Kay and the audience and how much they struggled to get any kind of contact with him when all this was going down. When Lori was kind of on the run and hiding him and all that type of stuff, right? And they were like screaming like something's going wrong, with the police and whatnot. And so to hear these people talking who they might not have known at this time exactly what was taking place, like with the history of Lori and trying to get JJ from Kay and Larry and hide him and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just so gut-wrenching and heartbreaking to imagine these moments here where I'm sure they would have given anything to have had that moment, right? And then to hear basically strangers talking about this interaction and knowing what not them knowing, but now knowing what was just so close to this huge thing going down, and obviously where the children and others lose their lives. So I find this absolutely a heartbreaking testimony to listen to.
Now, that weekend, did you see Chad Daybell at all?
Yes.
Okay. How many times did you see him, if you remember?
I would say 4 times.
Okay.
According to memory.
Okay. Can you tell us about any those interactions?
That's when he was trying to teach me about some of their beliefs. Okay. About the gathering of the 144,000 and then Satan having powers to push people out of their bodies and then the spirits being stuck.
Yeah, that's a lot right there. Couple of things with this. Interesting that you can kind of see from this perspective, and again, this is going on the assumption and the basis that I'm taking David at face value for what he's saying, right? So he's meeting Chad, he sees him 4 times this weekend, and Chad's just almost immediately into this, like, hey boy, we want you to be part of 144,000. You know what I'm saying? Like that type thing. And so it's almost like you can see how Chad worked with this whole narrative of just, his grift, whatever you want to call it. But hearing David describe it, and then again, just hearing the things that like Chad's talking about, I'm just like, yikes. I mean, can you imagine going to someone's house? And again, this is what I have so many questions about, is going to someone's house, staying with them, you're doing a podcast, you're doing this, whatever, and they start coming at you with this like next level stuff over here, all these other going ons at the same time. It just seems so bizarre to me. And I often wonder if specifically with David, and Melanie, if there was some level of, and he'll even mention this, where he was going along with and that type of thing. And I think that this is a narrative we hear from many people, not just those two, who were following Chad and Lori kind of in this group or whatever. But also, was he going along with almost like this, almost like, well, I got a new girlfriend and these are her friends. I want to fit in, I want them to think highly of me.
And did you, what was your response to Chad's, sort of concepts?
I just said, if the Lord's gathering is 144,000, I believe that would happen through his prophet. And then as far as the Satan having power to push people out of the bodies, I said, we're taught differently in that. That can't happen. He's not given that kind of power.
Now, one thing I would have been interested to see in this is seeing someone, and again, I'm taking this at face value, right? So we're going on the assumption that this is all true and this is accurate, that kind of a thing, right? The look on Chad's face when someone kind of was like, that's not how it goes, type thing. Because again, I just think that if somebody were to sit here and be like, Chad, we were taught different, that would be through the prophet, okay? I think Chad's thinking this, and I am the prophet, type thing, and Lori is my prophetess, kind of a thing. And so I would love to see Chad's reaction to that kind of friction, type thing. Because I do think in listening to this, that's what Lori and Chad thought of themselves, right? It's almost like they went off in this left field from like the religion that they were like all started off on. And again, now I've not gone down the rabbit hole of all this. This is just my little sofa opinion here, okay? And this is not bashing any one specific, religion or whatever, but Lori and Chad's thing that they went off over here with and kind of formed these own beliefs of their own. It was almost like they were trying to write their own Bible, write their own story with them being at the center of it, and kind of just veering off from these traditional teachings and the LDS and whatnot, taking those and almost like trying to make it their own, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But listening to David talk, and him kind of being like, well, wait, we're taught differently than this. Like what you're saying is differently. And I'm like, well, yeah, David might know that, or someone of their religious beliefs. But to Chad and Lori, I'm like, I think that's what they wanted to do, right? I think they wanted their own Bible, their own book, whatever you call it, and they were going to be the main characters.
I was listening, and then I questioned, and that's I don't know what you mean by going along. I did.
Did you believe him?
No.
Okay. Did you let him know you didn't believe him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, this is what I'm talking about. We hear this from so many different people, right? After the fact of, well, I didn't say anything, or I didn't, want to, make waves, or whatever the case may be, right? And now David's saying specifically, did you believe him? No. Did you let him know that you didn't believe him? No. Also, the whole thing, I'm really trying to like be on the fence here with some of this stuff, because I'm sitting here and imagining like, okay, so you're at this house, they're coming at you with this next level stuff. It's like, okay, I have to stay the night here. Let's just, whatever. But as we'll hear more and more of what he says, there's also other red flags that I just feel so often throughout this. If somebody had said something at some point, called out a little bit harder, maybe something could have been done.
Me and Melanie met with Chad and Lori at this property.
Okay. And it was next to a church?
Yes.
Okay. What happened when you met with Chad and Lori next to a church?
They just trying to tell us about that beautiful building, like a temple that was there, and that was in spirit. But so they wanted to show it to us, but I couldn't see anything.
Okay. Why did they want to show you the temple or the heavenly building they said they were seeing?
I think it tied in with things that they believed in, but.
Now, this is the other parts of this that kind of get a little bit like, it's just like, okay, so this is the part where they've gone to look at the property and they're having these visions of this temple and he doesn't see it there, in this whole dynamic. There is red flag material left and right going on here, okay? Like, there is enough already into the middle of the strip that if I was David, I would have been like, hey, Melanie, I need to talk to you in private over here, girl. And I would have just been like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I have concerns. Had them since we got here. They're getting worse.
I didn't know all their beliefs.
Did you believe it? Could you see a building?
No, I didn't believe it was there, and I couldn't see it. But I was trying to be respectful and just kind of follow along, I guess.
And there's those key words again. Kind of follow along, be respectful. And here's one thing too. You know, in the beginning of this, or I shouldn't even say the beginning, but for the different relationships that different people had with them, you know. For example, look at April Raymond, who testified. I mean, she very quickly was like, yeah, I'm out. Like, no. You know what I'm saying? Like, absolutely not, you know. And I think one thing that we so often see in situations like this, with this cult-like behavior, is that the people who are running the show, if you will, the Chad and Lori's of the situation, they're scoping out people who aren't going to say, you know, this is crazy talk. What are you talking about? You know, I don't want to have anything to do with this, right? Or else they want to be able to form their little clique. So they're going to find people that they can kind of groom and bring in and do all this kind of stuff with. So I think that's one thing, a dynamic going on, I should say, at least it's my opinion, of why we see so many people who are like, you know, well, I just wanted to be respectful and I don't want to say anything. You know, but again, I then go to the question of, well, if you didn't think any of this stuff and it was so out there, why participate in certain things with this crowd? Like, this would have been like I think we've all been in situations like that where you're kind of like, you know, almost like a work function, you know what I'm saying? Where you're going to be nice, you're going to put a smile on your face, but you're totally like, you know, yeah, I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back to do this or whatever. You know where to keep your distance from. And that's what confuses me with everyone involved here. It's almost like, well, since it all went down south, it's like so many people are like, oh, well, you know, I didn't believe in that. And it's like, well, if you didn't, then why were you so wrapped up in, you know, it? And I'm not accusing David specifically of this, but there's just many players in this case that seem to have been that way. And it really leaves me questioning what were the true motives of everybody.
During the times you saw Chad, what was his interactions like with Lori Vallow?
They were really loving with one another and affectionate.
Okay. Now, at this time, were you aware that he was still married to Tammy Daybell?
Yes.
Okay. Did the fact that he was married come up at all?
Yes.
All right. How did that happen?
I asked him I just asked him how his marriage was with the Tammy and if she was a good wife, and he said he had no complaints, that she was a good wife, but he said her time was coming up, and that him and Lori were gonna, you know, go do the things that they had committed to do for God.
Okay, so this is a part where I'm like, whoa, Mama Gemma, big red flags. Okay, so Tammy's still alive. Chad and Lori are all over each other, right? They've got this whole thing going, you know, oh, this is what's going to be going on. Tammy's, you know, her time is coming to an end. Lori and I are going to go off and do, you know, what, you know, whoever wants us to do with 144,000, whatever. This right here would have been major red flag material. This is like not right, okay? I just, even like from whether it's from a moral compass or a religious compass type way, none of this seems legit. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm just like, okay, this part right here, I would have heavily been questioning, even wanted to be involved with anyone like this on a level of, let me put my name out there on a podcast with them, anything of that nature, because it's just like, what is going on at this point? These two people are all over each other. He's talking about his wife is going to be dying. Well, I wonder why. He's, you know, all up in it with his blonde chick, you know, that type thing. This is very suspicious to me.
Okay. So when you say her time was coming up, Tammy's time was...
He said he had a dream that she was going to pass away before he was 50 or by the time he was 50.
Okay. And so that was Tammy was going to pass away before Chad was 50?
Yeah, by the time Chad was 50.
You see, I mean, I'm trying to think if somebody told me that. And again, it's hard for me to think because, especially here, if you're part of the Sofa Squad, you know how we are in true crime. We watch this stuff. So any little thing like that, like if a neighbor told me, it's just like, how's Tammy doing? Well, I had a dream, kind of a thing. Oh, I would probably anonymously report them. I'm not going to lie. I would be like, we're getting ready to have damn 48 hours up in here kind of a thing. Because, I mean, that's where it gets to, right? This is not normal at all. This should have set off serious red flags to have been like, it's time to go.
That's what I learned. They were going to gather the 144,000.
And they were going to do it together.
Yeah.
Did you have any response to this?
That's where I just said that because he felt he was kind of saying that I was one of them, and that's why he wanted me up there. And that's when I said, well, that would be a call from God and through his prophet.
Okay.
And again, I bet that burnt Chad's biscuits that David wasn't just like, and you are that prophet.
Okay. And when you said we, who's we did the podcast?
Melanie Gibb and Lori Vallow.
Okay. So you're in Lori's kitchen in her home, right?
Yes.
On a Sunday evening?
Yes.
Was JJ there?
No.
Where was JJ?
Alex was babysitting him.
Okay. And was he babysitting him in the apartment or somewhere else?
At his place, his apartment.
All right. Who told you that?
Lori.
Now, this is the part that gets me is when I'm imagining these final hours leading up to whatever happened, and hearing this like, oh, Alex was babysitting him, and oh, this is what we're doing, and all of this, I wonder what the interactions were like, because David will later testify like, oh, they all seem like, basically decent people. So I'm like, well, what was the interaction like? That we didn't see type thing. Was Alex nice to JJ? Was he mean to him? Was he saying awful things to him? That kind of stuff that just, it really haunts my thoughts.
Did you see JJ again that evening?
Yes. About 10:30, I believe it was 10:30 at night, I heard the front door open, which was to my back. I turned around and I saw Alex carrying JJ, and JJ was asleep and his head was on his shoulder.
And Alex carried him in the house?
Yes.
Did you see where Alex went?
He took him upstairs.
Okay.
And put him in bed.
All right. Do you remember what JJ was wearing?
Seemed like it was shorts and a T-shirt, but I can't remember the colors. I almost want to say it was the camouflage shorts, if I remember right, but okay.
All right. So Alex, and did you see Alex leave that night?
Seemed like I heard the door open and close. I didn't turn around again.
Okay, now this is one of those mental images that's very haunting, because I remember when this information was kind of all coming out, it was like everyone was like, oh my gosh, he had already done what he did to JJ. JJ wasn't alive or something, right? And so re-listening to some of this, I'm starting to have different thoughts on, and we'll get to them as we go. So one thing I'm curious to know is, do we think, was JJ really asleep at this moment, or had something already taken place with him? At first, I thought something had already taken place with him. Now I think that something later took place with him, like later that night, right? Which makes me then wonder, in regard to charges on Lori and that type thing, how, if you could get her on those, or if that could possibly happen, if that's part of it. Because I was always of the mind that maybe Alex had did something to him in the apartment, but then another part of me is like, well, why would he bring him back in that state in front of others type thing, right? Again, this is all going based on face value of what we're hearing from Melanie, from David, that type thing.
Where was JJ sleeping while you were staying there?
In Lori's room.
Okay. And what room were you in?
I was in JJ's room.
Okay. So did you spend that night there as well?
Yes.
All right. Did anything happen in the night?
Yeah, in the early hours of the morning, it was one of the worst nightmares of my life. It was very real.
Now we're going to hear more about this nightmare, especially when Archibald gets up there and does cross-examination. I think, okay, again, there's one level where we're taking everything at face value. So he had a really bad nightmare, and then Melanie was like, baby, I'm going to go get Chad and Lori to do a blessing on you. Please hold. You know, but they can never get a hold of him, right? Again, face value, what everyone's saying. But then I'm also just like, isn't that weird? And again, this is just me, conspiracy theory, this whole nightmare thing that he'll describe later in some of the clips we're going to listen to about how this was, abnormal and, this was so real and so evil. And I'm like, look at what was going on in some fashion in that house that night, right? So is this some kind of a cover story? And I'm not trying to insinuate that David did something to, or Melanie and David did something to JJ or anything like that, but did they hear something? That type of situation where it was like, okay, well, this is what we'll come up with. Or was it just legitimate of, he had a nightmare, this was a way for Melanie to be like, I'm gonna get you a blessing, you just hold on. And that type thing, which is just as weird to me.
So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
So did Melanie come try to help you as you were waking up from that nightmare?
Yes.
Okay. How did that happen? Let me do it this way. How did Melanie try to help you?
She had heard me talking in my sleep, kind of, I guess I was screaming out or calling out.
Okay.
And so she kind of helped wake me up.
Okay. And then what happened after she helped wake you up?
She said, I'm going to go get Lori, see if we can get Chad over here to give you a blessing.
Okay.
So she went, and she went to go get Lori, but she came back because she said she couldn't get anybody.
Now, again, that part to me is just so odd. Why would you go do that in the middle of the night? It doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, again, it's almost coming from this whole thing of like this, if people were closer, because even like with him, right, he's already seen all this bizarre behavior. You wake up having this crazy nightmare. They're the last ones I would want to come give me a blessing, right? I wouldn't want anything like that from Chad. If I had heard this stuff and I knew that it was like against my teachings and stuff, I just feel like I would have been like, girl, calm down with the blessing thing. It's okay. I'll take a melatonin and call it a night.
And so when you woke up the next morning, did you see JJ that morning?
I did not.
Okay. Did you make any inquiries about JJ?
Yes, I did. We went downstairs to say goodbye, and Lori was there, and she just said that JJ had an episode, and he climbed up on the cabinets, and then he climbed up on top of the fridge, and then he climbed up on top of the upper cabinets and knocked over her picture of Christ. And she just said that he was out of, she couldn't control him.
So what did she say she did?
She called Alex and had Alex come and get him.
Okay. So when she said she had Alex take JJ, what did you do?
Well, before she told me that Alex took JJ, I said, well, I'd like to see him because I wanted to make sure he was okay.
Why?
Well, because I didn't see any signs of the cabinets. There was no damage on the cabinets. There was no scuffs on the stainless steel fridge. And I just was trying to understand what was going on here. But I also, if JJ did have a problem, I'd like to give him a blessing.
Okay. And so then you ask her where he was.
Yeah.
And what did she say?
She said Alex. She had Alex come and get him.
I mean, so many blessings being passed around this house, right? This is the part about this that I find odd. Now, first of all, obviously, right, the testimony of Lori saying that JJ was crawling around the damn cabinets and stuff. I mean, come on, right? And not saying anything against David, but we've heard this from others, like, that, he had this situation where we know now she was working up to this whole JJ's a zombie and all of that. So all this happens overnight. You never see JJ again, but he wants to see him because, well, the cabinets didn't look messed up and this didn't look weird. And so again, I'm just like, well, what was going on? I almost feel like there was red flags going off for him, possibly Melanie, but it was the whole thing of nothing was being said. Why would you want to check on JJ? Because you're not seeing basically proof of what Lori was saying. Why would you ask the mother of the child, right? Technically or whatever. Why would you question that unless there was something odd going on? Now, if you had this nightmare that was so unsettling like that and accompanied by everything, there's where it's getting more into the, okay, so there is a weird vibe here going on, something's not right in this household.
You've given talks or speeches about the second coming of Jesus. Is that right?
About my dreams and visions.
So would you call yourself a visionary man?
Well, others have called me that. I don't call myself anything.
So on your speeches or your podcasts, have you shared your visions with other people?
Yes.
And you've had visions of secret combinations taking place in Washington, D.C.
Judge,
Yes.
I'm going to object at this point. I fail to see the continued relevance of this.
Goes to his credibility, Your Honor. The state brought this up, not me.
It is, I think it's appropriate.
Judge, I'm sorry, what?
Well, I haven't ruled yet.
I know. I apologize, Your Honor.
What was your comment? Go ahead.
I was just going to ask under Rule 16, comment 610 is that impugning somebody's religious beliefs or going beyond the scope of this trial is impermissible cross-examination.
Well, that door opened a long time ago in this case. I think with the context of the state's evidence, I will keep that rule in mind. I appreciate you bringing that up. At this point, I do think we're still within the scope of permissible cross-examination given the direct examination, so I'll overrule the objection.
Okay, now this part here, so first of all, that's Archibald up there. He's doing the cross-examination. There's something about his deadpan tone of voice when he's talking about this stuff that was absolutely sending me over the edge when I was listening to it the first time, because I was just like, it almost brings home the absurdiness of it even more so. I would love to see what he looks like in the courtroom, right? Now, also interesting here where he's like, I didn't bring this up, the state did. This is the thing that the state's going to run into with these witnesses like this. Melanie's, Zulema's, especially Zulema, David, Melanie Plowski, all these people like this who are getting up here who were like involved and loosely involved and of this, some, in the same realm as some of these beliefs and stuff like that. The defense is, this is just, it is what it is, right? They're going to get up and call this kind of stuff out. And so it's interesting to hear how Archibald does it with David, because he just very methodically and slowly walks him through this. And I can see why he's doing it and what he's doing. Now, this doesn't mean that I am agreeing and rooting for Ms. Lori or anything like that, obviously. But I can see what he's doing, right? And unfortunately, it's very effective with a lot of these people because, the stuff that they're getting up here and telling this jury, I'm sure the jury is like, oh, what?
You've given talks about visions of secret combinations in Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
Yes.
You've given talks about visions of secret combinations in England and Saudi Arabia. Is that right?
Yes.
You've given talks about evil entities in England, right?
No, I'm not sure where that one's going.
Okay. You've seen visions of Russia and China invading the United States.
Yes.
And this is what I'm talking about. Him getting up here and just methodically going through all these visions and all this kind of stuff. And just like Archibald said, where he's like, this goes to credibility, right? Him getting up here, and some of it I do question with the state and whatnot, like with David being up there, and I'm sure there's creating a timeline, last seen JJ, that type of stuff. But with that comes this stuff too, the can of worms that gets opened, and him bringing up all this type of stuff, and you're just like, yikes. Okay, now again, I don't know where all this falls in the realm of Chad's belief or the traditional LDS beliefs. I don't know, and I'm not here to you can criticize anything with the LDS and anything like that, but Archibald really kind of in my opinion, makes David look like he is on some of these fringe beliefs with Chad, right? Now, mind you, when they get into the whole conversation of the 144 and that needs to be done through the prophet, there's stuff like that. And it also makes me wonder, because in the very beginning of this, and I don't think I put the clip in, but it sounds to me like David is still a member of the church. And so I don't know how this works with the church. If you were to get up here and admit to some of these beliefs, almost like you're having to walk a fine line, because you don't want to say, oh yeah, we were all running with this, because you could get, and I don't know what you call it with the church when you get like excommunicated. I don't know if that's what they call it in that religion. So I don't know how much of that is playing into the narrative of what we're hearing from some like Melanie and David and whatnot, how much that's playing into it or not. If you're versed with that, I would love to hear in the comment section, because part of me feels like some of that is what is going on here, where there's this like just like the whole thing where they didn't want, and by they I mean Melanie and David. If you've been following like in some of the interviews that they did, this is a while ago, and like with Melanie, and I think David did one, or maybe when they were on the stand, that's right, for the Chad Daybell thing. Regardless, the whole thing about having different stories about where they slept that weekend, because remember, they were not technically married yet, and so it was kind of like, I guess, taboo for them to be sleeping in the same room. So it was one of those things where they were trying to skirt around that and say different things. And that's what I'm talking about, is things like that, where you're trying to still toe this certain line to not, make yourself look bad in front of your church, right? Or your beliefs, or whatever it is. But then there's this other part to it where, for this, it's like this belief system that Chad had, which was clearly, him and Lori just went way out there, like, of things that had nothing to do with this religion, right? So, of course, you don't want to sit here and be like, oh, well, yeah, we were doing podcasts about this, and things like that is what I'm getting at.
You've seen visions of Russia and China attacking the United States military and defeating us in 3 days.
Yes.
I mean, it keeps getting worse.
You've seen visions of the United States being sacrificed for a one-world government, right?
I don't know where that one came from.
You've been, well, I didn't make this up.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I didn't make this up, right? He's like, look, I didn't make it up, buddy. I got out of your little journal or whatever, or like one of your books or whatever the case may be. But again, the deadpanness, it's sending me over the edge. I cannot with that. I mean, it's just like, oh my God, how did we arrive here?
You talked about having a vision while at Lori Vallow's home in September of 2019. You told that to the prosecutor, right?
Objection, misstates the evidence.
Overruled. If the witness can answer, you can correct if that's misstating evidence.
I had a nightmare.
So a nightmare and a vision are two different things.
Yeah.
So how do you define a nightmare versus a vision?
Well, it's like whatever the nightmare was about, it was like I was living in it.
And a vision is just pretend?
No, a vision is when you're observing and you're being shown.
So both a vision and a nightmare are real?
No, not necessarily.
I mean, this one had my head spinning, right? I was just like, oh my God. But again, with Archibald, I mean, he's doing an effective job with this, right? If he's trying to discount these people getting up here and taking the stand, I mean, imagine being in the jury and listening to this, right? Like, you had the narrative going with the state up there, but now him getting up here and you're just like, okay, what? And again, these are normal things, right? I mean, I could sit here and be like, you know what? Like, what one might call a vision, I might be like, well, that's me envisioning, whatever, a goal of mine, whatever it could be, right? So it's familiar in a sense, but not to the level that maybe David or these other people take it to. The nightmare, we've all had those, but the level they take it to is very questionable. And so it makes you sit here and say, huh? Well, again, this is just me sitting at, the damn sofa, right? So if I was on a jury listening to this and it involved at the center of it children's and obviously other people, I'm not trying to exclude anyone else, but lives have been lost. And then I'm listening to this stuff. It's just, it's not a good look.
So can you further explain the difference between a vision and a nightmare? How one works and not the other one?
The vision is when you're being shown, when you're being shown things when you're seeing the future, but you're not seeing yourself. Somebody else is presenting it.
And so your visions come from who?
The ones I talked about came from the angels, under God.
And your nightmare comes from who?
It was very adversarial. It was consumed. It was a lot of fear and a lot of darkness, and there was no order to it.
And again, this the entire thing that was just said, I'm just like, what? I mean, it's very complicated. It's very layered, and Archibald pulling this information out of him, do I think it's like an aha moment for the defense? Absolutely not, right? But again, this is basically what I expected when they got these people up on the stand. It's just going to kind of fall apart with all these bizarre beliefs and, this kind of fringe stuff out here and just getting, all up in it about stuff, right? I mean, this is just so complicated to listen to, and, oh, well, it could be this and it could be that and this, that, and the other. And that's the thing with this case. There's so many different beliefs that are tangled up in it that you have to weave your way through. I mean, it just muddies the water because, again, it's almost like you're having to walk through this belief system to get to the center of what happened to all these people.
You've had these visions and nightmares throughout your time that you knew Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow, and Melanie Gibb. Is that right?
No, I just had that experience that night.
Now, that part is so crazy to me where he's like, no, I just had that experience that night. That's what I was talking about earlier where I'm like, what a coincidence, right? And it almost makes you wonder, okay, if this was such a one-off thing and then the next morning you're getting up and JJ's not around and, oh, he's gone and this and that, all the things that had transpired this weekend, it's almost like, did they have a conversation, and by they I mean Melanie and David, of something's not right, something's off, something's wrong. Now obviously we know nobody was contacted, like authorities by them specifically weren't contacted or anything. But nonetheless, regardless, before you get to the point of being like, well, let's call the cops, just in general of something is off, right? I mean, they've described enough to me that would have sent me packing.
Okay. So on the night that you were in Rexburg, you wanted to get a blessing from Chad Daybell. Is that right?
Well, Melanie was just said, I think you need to get a blessing. I'm going to go see if I can get Lori to get Chad. So
And
I was, I just agreed. I was distraught.
And what is a blessing?
It's when it's exercised under the direction of the priesthood to bless you with deliverance, comfort, or healing, or guidance.
So you wanted a blessing from Chad Daybell.
Now, this is the other thing I'm talking about. For him to have earlier described his thought processes on Chad and this, stuff that Chad's coming at him with, I don't think I would want a blessing from this man, right? In the middle of the night. I mean, come on, right? There's something off about that. And again, am I trying to insinuate that, I think this or that or whatever? No, other than anything that something is off with that statement. I don't understand it. I don't understand why you were already like, where they're coming up with these, weird, I'm the prophet and this and that and blah, 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 blah. Why would you even entertain getting a blessing from this person in the late hours of the night? I feel like something happened. I feel like maybe, it could be the nightmare, right? But there was some other thing, if that's what happened. If he really was woken up by this like vivid nightmare, almost like this sixth sense thing of being like something's not right, and we're using the story of the blessing and all that type stuff. I don't know. I just guess, to sum it all up, something seems really sketchy about that.
Well, Melanie just offered to get it. I was in a position where I wasn't all there. I was really struggling with whatever. I just remember it was horrified with what I was seeing.
And so, what would a blessing from Chad Daybell do for you?
My God, it's the $1 million question, right?
And when Chad told you that Tammy's, his wife's time was up, that he had a dream she would die, did you believe that?
I wasn't certain to what to believe at that point.
Excellent question, one that I want to know as well. Honestly, I think Archibald has been super chill with him on the stand, as well as a lot of the other witnesses and whatnot. But it's a legitimate question, did you believe that? And I think that it's interesting that here he's not coming right back out and saying, no, absolutely not. I wasn't sure what to believe. And that's where I'm just like, there are so many red flags in this weekend here. Did anyone not think to be like, should we reach out to Tammy? Should we do this? And he kind of does that with, and again, this goes back also to what I was talking about earlier, him wanting to check on JJ before they leave. That's what I'm talking about. I too would have been like, Melanie, I would have been like burning Melanie's ears off on the way home. I would have been like, girl, do you know Tammy? Should we reach out to her, see if she's okay? Something, and I feel like maybe that conversation happened, but we just don't know about it.
He was teaching about the 144,000. Is that a concept you're familiar with?
Yes.
And tell us what you understand that to be.
All I understand is during the time of tribulation that God's going to have 144,000 that will cover the earth to gather his elect and to help gather his people and help deliver them from the trying circumstances.
And have you wanted to be part of the 144,000?
No, it would be an honor, but it's nothing I was seeking.
Now, I thought this was interesting, too, where he was like, well, it'd be an honor, but, it's not what I was after. And for the sounds of it, not what he was after through Chad and Lori either, right? Because, again, if this is, and again, I don't know the belief system that goes with, the church versus Chad and Lori's, but if that is like a standard belief that goes with the church or whatever, and then you're hearing somebody else come up talking about, oh, no, we're running that show, that would be like pure blasphemy to me, right? Because you're just like, well, wait a minute, it's supposed to be this dude over here, and now you're saying it's you and Miss Thing. This ain't adding up.
And these are the kinds of things that you talk about on your podcasts.
No.
What do you talk about on your podcast?
On the podcast, I go into topics like fasting, and then a lot of them were the conversion, coming from where I came from, and the conversion stories, some experiences from the time I was converted up through my mission, serving in the LDS mission. And so, but they were in the context of build faith. They weren't in the context of seeking these things. They were experiences as a result of repentance and faith and service.
I would love to know in the comment section if anyone has listened to his podcast and can confirm that this is true, what he's saying, that like, oh, we talk about fasting and stuff like that, like we're not really after what Chad and Lori were, that type thing. Again, you know, doing the podcast with them and whatnot and just seeing all the stuff they saw over the weekend, I would have been like a little bit leery, because I would have been like, you know, take aside what it might look like for the church, like almost like your own personal brand, right? It's like, look, y'all are like apocalypse type things, and we're just talking about fasting and doing some canon and stuff over here, you know. We're not really into all that.
And so when you agreed to do a podcast with Chad and Lori and Melanie on Sunday night in Rexburg, Idaho, what was the topic of that podcast?
First off, it was just Melanie and Lori. Chad was not part of it.
Okay. And so what was the podcast with Melanie and Lori about?
It's about sanctification, and I'm trying to remember what the actual topic was.
What does sanctification mean?
Well, it's when you're as you repent and serve God, and as you prove faithful to Him, your heart, the Lord changes your heart, makes you clean, makes you whole, and endows you with greater faith.
And your audience for this podcast was, again, who?
It was preparing of people, and there was camps, the preparedness camps. Sometimes I went and spoke at those.
Now, this is another one that if anybody has listened to or had a chance to hear this podcast, I would love to know what it was really about, because I do think that it's odd that he is at a loss for words as to what it was about. And again, this is me going on, I haven't heard it, or I could have years ago when this first happened or whatever, but I just don't remember. But I think it's interesting that he's kind of like blanking out a little bit and trying to like, you know, the answer he's given is just not hitting it for me. But again, I don't know if this is accurate. I don't know any of that stuff or whatever. But there's just a lot of fumbling, I feel like, going on here. And again, it could just be as simple as trying to distance oneself from these very fringe beliefs and being involved in this type of situation, belief system, that type thing, and not to say that that's due to nefarious reasons, but it could have simply just be, look, I don't want this association, I don't want my church to think anything, or whatever the case may be. But regardless, I'm curious if anybody has heard the podcast and is it accurate with what he is saying.
When you left Lori's apartment on September 23rd, 2019, you indicate that you were anxious to go visit your son in Pocatello.
Yes.
And did Melanie go with you there?
She did.
And that's the time that you say you did not see JJ.
Yes.
And did you call the police?
No, I didn't. Did not.
All right. You didn't have any reason to, right?
I didn't see any reason. Lori was one of the most sweetest, kindest, fun-loving. She was I really enjoyed her. She was a wonderful woman. This stuff kind of hit me that weekend, and I just wasn't, anyway, I just didn't see it was like what they're teaching doesn't match what I see in their character.
Now, I thought this was interesting where he asked him, did you call the police? Right? Obviously, we can see him trying to build up to it. There's no reason to call. But even more interesting is that, he's finishing this weekend off with, no, their character, how they were didn't match what they were teaching. And that's one thing that I think is very dangerous about these cults and people of this nature. such as Chad and Lori, I'm sure they did come off very charming, right? They most of the time they do, but it's almost like, okay, here's all this charm and all this stuff, but these like really crazy out there beliefs are still at the forefront. And that's where I think we can see people get sucked into this kind of stuff. Now, again, there's so many different layers to this going on, simply because, he's there with Melanie and they're doing this and, oh, let's go look at this. And they really want them to move up there. And I really do feel like, again, that Chad and Lori, whoever was recruiting or whatever, they were both kind of in it together, I feel like. But they were really just going after people that they felt like they could get one over on, and kind of like bring into this whole narrative that they were doing. And of course, I think as anybody would, once the cookie crumbles, and especially the way it did in this level of horror and tragedy, people are trying to like run scared. You know what I mean? Like, or I just, I didn't have anything to do with that. I mean, I get it.
And so I kind of left a little confused and puzzled and trying to discern.
Well, their character was good, right?
Yeah, I saw goodness, yes.
And
I didn't see any reason to suspect.
I mean, my God, those words, I didn't see anything to suspect. I saw goodness, that type of thing. It's bone chilling to know what was really going on. And so even though listening to this on the stand, part of me is just like, I guess it's just how you view things. Because again, for me, the things he's describing, I'm like, this is frightful, right? This is alarming. But it didn't seem to be to them. And again, this is all going based on, we're taking everything at face value, right? And so there's that. And again, I'm not trying to implicate him in this by any means. But, I just think that it left me with so many questions, especially in regard to, what was the belief system? Did he believe, on one hand he says that, well, Chad says this and that's not how it goes. Okay, well then did you believe him when he said that Tammy, was going to die before 50? Well, I didn't know. If somebody was telling me something that was so against like what I, am taught in my faith and this kind of stuff, and I'm just like, what? Okay, that's kind of bizarre. I think that would also go to my opinion on their character, right? For me personally, I don't think I could say, I might be like, they were like really nice, but super weird. Something's off. I just don't know if I would be like, I saw goodness. But, that's his experience, right? So it is what it is. Again, I'm very curious to hear what y'all have to think. Obviously specifically about David's testimony, but some of the questions that I've asked along the way, if you've listened to any of the podcasts I mentioned. And again, do you think that what we're being told, and I lump in David and Melanie just simply because of the weekend together there. And I think Melanie has this whole other level of involvement with them that she, we've learned through her testimony and stuff like that. But specifically this, where they've gone up, they stayed for this weekend, he's talking about these fringe beliefs, but again, just kind of going along with not wanting to make waves. Again, hindsight rips your heart out because we know what happened. And it just feels like, my gosh, I just feel like Chad and Lori were screaming from the top of the rooftops to the people that were around them and following them and doing this of, something bad is on its way, right? So that's it. If you're still watching, drop hearts down in the comment section for everybody involved, the victims who are no longer with us. And that's it. Next time we gather around and listen to some more of this interesting, we will call it testimony, I'll see y'all soon.